I guess to sort of think about, we're seeing a lot, and I can talk underwater about what we're seeing with the ATO in terms of the debt side of things. But what are you seeing at your end of the sort of spectrum, Andrew?
Probably a similar landscape to what you're seeing. Very hard nosed, quite aggressive. One of the things we've seen is a focus on inter-entity dealings. So people, often have more than one entity in their group, and they might have a trust own a farming property or a factory, and then they'll have another entity carrying on the business. And the tax office is denying deductions within those groups if there's not sort of arm's length transaction, recharging going on within the group. So it's sort of like a transfer pricing type approach, but on a domestic basis. And
Mm.
so it's quite a technical issue, but it's something that we've seen in almost all of the audits and all of the reviews that we've got involved in, where the tax office picks up some easy money because very rarely do people with complex groups actually get all those inter-entity relationships and charging going on at arm's length. So that's one thing we're seeing. Also, a lot of aggression from these state revenue authorities, stamp duty, land tax,
Mm.
payroll tax, probably at a level, so I've been doing tax for about 30 years. I've never seen that aggressive, really, really aggressive. So I don't know what the story is with the state coffers of the of the state governments, but they
Yes, yes, and yeah. Yeah, we're certainly hearing that a lot in the sense that we don't do a lot of work with the revenue officers, but we do bits and pieces over the years. And I used to always say to people that they were much easier to deal with in many ways.
yeah.
But I think you're right. I think there's been a real shift around that, and so on. Yeah, look, and I think from our end too, it's the same message that we're seeing along is that the ATO are going very tough. They're applying the legal practice statements strictly now, which is catching I think a lot of people out who are used to dealing with the ATO in a particular way over the years, and put a story into the portal about, and again, we'll obviously look at it from the debt perspective, but put a story into the portal, explain what's happened, and more often than not, you'll get a payment plan and potentially a remission of the interest and penalties if your story stacks up. What we're finding now is and that's why we get traditionally, we've had about 25% of our work from the accounting profession. It's probably closer to 40% now, because that is not the way it's working at the moment. They're requiring strict compliance. You need to tick all the relevant boxes. You miss a box, you miss something, one of the requirements that they have, and it's an automatic no. And then coupling that with, quite, I wouldn't use the word aggressive so much, but certainly a lot more timely recovery action. They're going harder and they're going faster against businesses and individuals, and that's it's a tough time to owe money to the ATO. But we are seeing that the ATO is very much looking at data, and I want to link it into something that we'll be talking about in a minute around that. And we've had some interesting ones now where, and these are in positions where we're putting in applications for, even just payment plans, let alone the removal of the interest and penalties. And, the ATO are coming back to us and saying, well, look, your client sent $150,000 overseas a month ago. What was that about? And was that money that maybe should have gone to the ATO? Or, we had a funny one recently where they said, well, it wasn't funny for the client, but we solved it. There's been a whole bunch of asset purchases, and they turned out to be high-end cars that they've been purchasing. And again, why are they paying those when really what should have happened is that the debt should have been paid? And so we're having to sort of explain that. But it's showing they're going back and looking at income matching and saying, you said you couldn't pay the debt at this point, but your BASs show a different story. So it's really becoming far more complex, and certainly the questions we're getting back from the ATO in response to our applications are getting more complex. But again, it's part of what we do. The good thing about it is we're, unlike a lot of people, we would lodge more applications with the ATO than any single entity in the country, and we get to see them all and we know how to respond to them.
Data matching, I think, is sort of what you're alluding to. It's been an ongoing project. There's hundreds of millions, if not billions, I guess, that's gone into those projects, and I think the tax office and the revenue authorities are seeing, the return on that. And I think the next wave of sort of verification of identity is going to tie into that. So if you look at sort of almost every level, we talk about sort of China with their sort of surveillance society, but if you think about the level of everything we do is electronic now, and the the ability for the government and all of the government authorities to access that information is, in real time, is becoming much more apparent.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one at the moment is Payday Super, in the sense that, traditionally the ATO haven't had visibility of whether you've paid your super or not to the fund. And now not only does Payday Super bring those obligations forward, but, the ATO have been very public in saying that they will be getting data dumps from the funds to check that when you report that you've paid it, that you have actually paid it. So that's a seismic shift, I think, in terms of how the ATO will be monitoring a very significant part of the sort of the debt piece that we see, because with us it's broadly pay-as-you-go withholding, GST, and superannuation are the big three debts. A lot of our clients unfortunately don't have a lot of income tax debt because they're not making a lot of profits, but some do, but everything. But that super one's always been a bit of a grey area for the ATO to monitor. But I think those days are absolutely behind us, and it's watch this space. They'll have all that in place very quickly.
The crazy thing, and it's I can't believe that we still have a discussion about where the economy's going and what GDP is doing and what unemployment's doing. Because if you think about the data sets that the federal government now has, literally they know within weeks who's been paid what, pretty much across the entire system, whether it's transactions between businesses or it's transactions involving employees or contractors. Like, it is for 90+% of the population. It's real-time information now.